Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a concept that honestly kind of flips the script on how we usually think about leadership and dealing with challenges.
It really does. We're not just talking about surviving tough times or, bouncing back.
Right, resilience is the usual buzzword. Get knocked down, get back up.
Exactly. But this is different. We're talking about building systems, teams, organizations that actually win because of the chaos. They get stronger from volatility.
That's the core of antifragility, isn't it?
Hmm.
And our mission today, really, is to dig into how you actually do that. How do you move past just getting back to baseline?
And build that strength, build knowledge, even profitability directly from the messiness and disorder that life throws at us.
Yeah, and we've got some fascinating sources for this deep dive. It's a real mix, everything from Nassim Taleb, who kind of defined the whole concept,
He really laid the groundwork.
to insights from places like Pixar and Intel on how it works in practice. Then there's military thinking from Clausewitz, even political philosophy from folks like Aristotle and the Federalist Papers.
And some deep ethical considerations, too, from Cicero Frankel. It's a broad look.
Absolutely. The goal here is to pull out the practical stuff.
Right.
What can leaders actually take away and use to turn all that uncertainty, which everyone feels, into a genuine advantage for their teams?
And it really has to start with understanding the basic physics of it all. Taleb's framework is key. Fragile, resilient, and antifragile.
Okay, let's break that down. We sort of intuitively know fragile, like a glass vase, right? Handle with care. But Taleb gives it a more technical definition based on how things react to stress.
He does. It's all about nonlinearity. For something fragile, the damage from stress isn't proportional. Specifically, think about lots of little bumps versus one giant hit.
Okay.
For a fragile thing, the combined effect of all those little bumps is actually less bad than the effect of one single large shock of the same total magnitude.
Ah, I see. So it can maybe handle the everyday minor stresses okay.
Yeah, maybe.
But that one big unexpected event, the black swan Taleb talks about, that's what shatters it.
Exactly. It's disproportionately vulnerable to the extreme, the rare event. Think about highly optimized systems.
Like just-in-time supply chains. They seem super efficient.
Super efficient in stable times. They handle tiny fluctuations, a truck being an hour late maybe.
Yeah.
But a single massive disruption, like a pandemic closing a major port.
Catastrophe.
See?
The whole thing grinds to a halt because there's no buffer.
Precisely. No fat, no redundancy. They're optimized for predictable efficiency, which makes them incredibly fragile in the face of the unpredictable extreme. They break, and they break hard.
So that's fragile. Then resilience, that's the goal most companies talk about, right? Being able to take a hit.
Right. Resilience is about absorbing that big shove, the pandemic, the market crash, whatever it is, and eventually getting back to your original shape. You resist, you recover, you return to baseline.
But anti-fragility, that's the next level. It doesn't just resist.
No, it fundamentally uses the force of that blow. It feeds on the disorder, the chaos, the errors. It gets stronger, smarter, maybe even more profitable because of the shock.
It's also nonlinear, but in the opposite way.
Exactly, flipped. The extreme event isn't just survived. It's a catalyst for improvement. The shock becomes an input, a source of energy, not just a cost to be endured.
Okay, that's a powerful idea. So where does fragility often start in an organization? Is it structure? Is it strategy?
Often it starts with the mindset, especially this idea that we can eliminate all errors through meticulous planning. And that takes us right into our first section.
Right, section 1, embracing volatility. This seems particularly relevant for creative fields, but probably applies much wider too. The idea that detailed planning is the enemy of innovation.
Yeah, Ed Catmull from Pixar talks a lot about this in Creativity, Inc. There's this almost illusional belief that if you just plan hard enough, meticulously enough, you can avoid failure.
But in creative work, or anything really new, that's just not true, is it?
It's not true, and worse, it often leads to derivative work. If your plan is perfect and accounts for everything, you're probably just copying something that already exists. You're planning the known, not discovering the unknown.
And the failure, when it inevitably comes, because you can't plan away all the unknowns in creative work, it hits harder for the overplanners.
Definitely. They don't just fail, they take longer to fail. They invest so much time, so much emotional energy into this elaborate blueprint. So when reality proves the blueprint wrong, they're crushed. Catmull uses this analogy of being stuck in a deep rut in the mud.
Right, because the plan, the non-working idea, is so deeply ingrained, pivoting feels like a massive defeat.
It's emotionally costly, politically costly sometimes too. The fragility isn't just in the plan, it's in the attachment to the plan.
So the antidote, the antifragile approach, is more like science.
Exactly. Think iterative trial and error. The creative process or any innovation process should be treated like a series of experiments.
Not a perfect execution of a grand design.
Right. And the mindset shift here is crucial. Experiments are fact-finding missions. That's the key phrase. Meaning any outcome that gives you new information is a good outcome. If your hypothesis bombs, finding that out quickly and cheaply is a win. It saves you from investing more in a dead end.
That reframes failure completely. It's not a waste of time. It's data acquisition.
It's necessary productive learning. And when teams see it that way, they actually enjoy the process more, even when it's really hard and confusing. They're not frustrated by setbacks, they're engaged in discovery.
And Pixar seems to live this. You mentioned that anecdote about Toy Story 3.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, the CEO, Ed Catmull, mentioned casually that Toy Story 3 was unusual because it didn't seem to have a major crisis during its development, unlike most Pixar films.
You'd think the team would be relieved, right? Like, phew, we dodged a bullet.
Nope, they were genuinely offended.
Offended? Why?
They took it as criticism. Like, he was implying they hadn't pushed hard enough, hadn't aimed high enough, hadn't tackled something genuinely difficult and new.
Wow. So, for them, the absence of crisis was a sign they might have played it too safe?
Exactly. They actually welcomed that feeling of, oh man, we have never seen this specific problem before, and it is really hard to solve. If it's not terrifyingly difficult at some point, it probably means it's derivative.
That completely changes the role of management then, if you can't prevent all risk.
Management's job shifts. It's not primarily about preventing risk or error, especially if you want breakthroughs. It's about building the capacity to recover.
Okay, how fast can we learn? How cheaply can we fix this?
Those are the questions. If there's fear in the organization, fear of failure, fear of speaking up, the leader's job isn't just to demand courage. It's to find the reason for that fear and fix it. Is it the process, the incentives, the culture?
That sounds good, but how do you balance that? Encouraging recovery without, encouraging sloppiness. If failure isn't punished, doesn't accountability slip?
That's the essential tension, isn't it? The key is distinguishing between productive failure, a well-designed experiment that gave you surprising but useful data, and just, well, incompetence or carelessness.
So you hold people accountable for the rigor of the attempt and how quickly they learn and adapt.
Precisely. Manage the process of discovery, reward the learning and the iteration, not just whether the initial guess happened to be right.
That ability to recover, to adapt,
Yeah.
it becomes absolutely critical when the whole ground shifts under your feet, like Andy Grove's concept of a strategic inflection point.
Yeah, the SIP. A moment where the fundamental rules of the game are changing for your business. It could lead to massive growth. Or
the beginning of the end.
right. And Intel faced this, famously with memory chips becoming commoditized, and later with that huge crisis over the flaw in the Pentium microprocessor, cost them, what, nearly $500 million?
A massive hit.
Mm-hmm.
But that story also reveals something interesting about where anti-fragility can hide in an organization. It wasn't necessarily the top brass figuring it all out.
Not initially, no. While senior management was reportedly arguing, debating whether to stick with the memory business or double down on microprocessors, the actual strategic turn was already happening, driven from below.
How so?
It was the middle managers, the people running production lines, the finance analysts deciding resource allocation, the supply chain folks. They were making small, daily, tactical decisions. Decisions to shift resources, prioritize microprocessor orders, phase out memory production lines, not because of some grand strategic memo from on high, at least not at first.
They were just reacting to the reality they saw on the ground. The market pressure, the customer demand.
Exactly. They were the anti-fragile part of the system, adapting locally under pressure, making the change happen organically before it was maybe even fully articulated as the official strategy.
So if the solution bubbles up like that, what's the crucial role for the leaders at the top? Grove seemed very clear on this.
Commitment. Absolute, unequivocal commitment once the direction becomes clear, even if they didn't initiate it. Grove's big lesson was you cannot hedge. You can't sort of half commit to the new direction.
He asked himself that question, right? What would a new CEO do?
Yeah, and the answer was clear. A new CEO with no emotional baggage tied to the old memory business would sell it off immediately and go all in on microprocessors. So that's what he had to champion.
Because if the leaders seem uncertain, or try to keep one foot in the past.
It creates confusion, hesitation, resignation throughout the organization. It kills that distributed adaptive energy that was actually solving the problem. Leadership has to model the new reality publicly, decisively. No hedging.
That idea of distributed initiative, people adapting locally under pressure, saving the day, that feels like a perfect segue into Section 2, looking at anti-fragility in conflict in military contexts.
It really is. We often think of warfare, especially the fog of war, as pure destructive chaos. But Clausewitz, writing about small wars, shows how that very disorder can be exploited.
Small wars, so like guerrilla warfare, insurgencies, that kind of thing.
Exactly, asymmetrical conflicts. And he notes this really peculiar characteristic. They often involve incredible boldness and audacity, right alongside a heightened sense of fear or caution, sometimes in the same fighters.
That sounds contradictory. How does that work?
It stems from the nature of the fighting. It relies heavily on individual initiative, especially in light units. Think scouts, skirmishers, partisans.
Not soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in rigid lines.
Right. Those soldiers in closed ranks rely entirely on orders from above. But the light infantrymen, the hussar, the riflemen in Clausewitz's time, they're constantly facing varied, difficult, often isolated tasks.
So they have to think for themselves.
They have to. And that constant exposure to decentralized problem solving under pressure builds experience, habit, the certain calmness, and a spirit of initiative and confidence that the soldier in the ranks lacks. They respect the danger, absolutely, but they're empowered to act.
And this decentralized adaptive structure lets them use tactics that leverage the chaos, making them unpredictable.
Precisely. Clausewitz describes tactics that are inherently antifragile because they exploit volatility. Things like using constant false alarms to wear down the enemy's vigilance, making them complacent.
So when the real attack comes, the response is slow, fragile.
Exactly. Or staging a slow, seemingly defeated retreat, only to reappear suddenly and attack from a completely unexpected direction using speed and surprise. These partisan operations thrive on local knowledge, immediate adaptation, and unpredictability. The whole system gains strength because each small part is highly adaptive.
If we map that military idea onto organizations, it sounds a lot like what the Federalist Papers argued about government structure, the need for commensurate power.
It's a direct parallel. The argument was straightforward. If the central government, the Union, is responsible for the common defense, it must be given the authority it needs to actually do that job. Control over armies, navies, finances.
The power has to match the responsibility.
It has to be commensurate with the end goal. Translate that to business. If you task a department or a team with a major volatile challenge like a huge digital transformation project.
High stakes, lots of unknowns.
But you don't give them the corresponding authority control over their budget, the power to hire the right people quickly, the ability to bypass slow, established procedures that aren't fit for purpose. What happens?
Failure. Guaranteed failure. They have the responsibility, but not the tools.
The challenge vastly outweighs the power. That mismatch creates fragility. An anti-fragile structure pushes authority down to where the action is, where the knowledge resides, ensuring power matches the volatility of the task.
And the flip side of that is internal division, right? If the parts of the organization are fighting each other, the whole thing becomes weak, fragile from the inside out. Aristotle warned about this.
He did. He worried about a community becoming like two city-states in one, opposed to one another. His example was when the guardians, the soldiers, become like an occupying garrison, separate from and distrusted by the ordinary citizens.
That separation breeds conflict.
It breeds lawsuits, indictments, constant internal friction. Think about corporate silos. Sales blaming product, marketing fighting with engineering, operations viewing finance as the enemy. When that internal conflict becomes the norm, the organization is brittle. It can't possibly stand united against an external shock.
That's a stark contrast to someone like Rousseau and his idea of the sovereign, where the unity is the strength.
Right. Rousseau argued that the sovereign body, being composed of the individuals within it, fundamentally cannot wish to harm its own members. There's an inherent alignment, at least conceptually. That unity provides an internal resilience against self-destruction, very different from Aristotle's divided state.
And bringing this back to modern conflict, that idea of unity, commitment, and sustained effort really comes through in that Ramadi example from Extreme Ownership.
Absolutely. Ramadi in the mid-2000s was the definition of a chaotic, volatile, high-stakes environment. The fog of war in urban combat like that is incredibly thick.
But the approach wasn't about a quick, decisive battle. It was different.
It was about sustained presence. Systematically clearing neighborhoods, setting up joint security stations, living among the populace, building relationships, and slowly, painstakingly turning the locals against the insurgents. It was converting chaos into stability through relentless, committed effort over months.
Turning volatility into a strategic gain, essentially.
Yes, but it required immense commitment. And again, leadership was key. The book highlights the company commander not just directing from afar, but being an exceptional warrior himself, physically present, leading from the front, driving his tank into danger to support his troops.
Modeling that commitment.
Modeling that absolute commitment. In high-stress, high-risk environments, anti-fragility demands leaders who don't just delegate risk, but visibly share the burden and reinforce the non-negotiable nature of the mission through their own actions.
Okay, so we've talked structure, strategy, dealing with external conflict. Let's move into section 3, which feels crucial, building the internal culture. The psychological infrastructure needed to handle all this volatility and disagreement without breaking.
Yeah, this is about making the organization itself psychologically robust, like building up its immune system so it can handle internal stresses and maybe even get stronger from them.
And a big part of that seems to be how you handle disagreement. Peter Drucker was really strong on this.
He really was. Drucker argued that the only way to break managers out of their biases, their special pleading for their own pet projects or preconceived notions, was to insist on documented, well-thought-through disagreement.
Not just encouraging debate, but actually requiring a formal counter-argument.
Yes. He believed a decision made without exploring a serious alternative was incredibly fragile. He called it a desperate gambler's throw.
Why so fragile?
Because reality has a nasty habit of proving initial assumptions wrong.
Okay.
Circumstances change, competitors react unexpectedly. If your chosen path turns out to be flawed, and you haven't already thought through a viable alternative...
You're scrambling, trying to invent Plan B under maximum pressure, right when Plan A is collapsing.
Exactly, you flounder. Having that pre-vetted alternative, even if you didn't choose it initially, means you have a fallback. You've already stress-tested another option. The organization is inoculated against catastrophic failure if the first bet doesn't pay off.
So the process of disagreement itself builds antifragility. It forces you to consider contingencies.
And it dramatically increases the odds of making a better decision in the first place. Drucker figured even if rigorous debate only bumps your probability of being right from, say, 51% to 85%, the expected value gain over time is enormous. It's worth the effort. He literally required managers to ensure someone made the strongest possible case against the proposed decision.
But that kind of conflict needs guardrails, doesn't it? Otherwise, it just turns into political infighting or backstabbing.
Absolutely, and that's where ideas like Kim Scott's radical candor come in. You need to structure the conflict constructively.
How you do that?
Scott is very clear. Leaders must absolutely forbid what she calls shuttle diplomacy. You know, where team member A comes to you to complain about team member B.
And you run back and forth trying to mediate.
Right. Scott says the leader's first response must be, you need to go talk to person B directly. Insist on direct communication first.
And if that doesn't work, if they try and still can't resolve it,
then the leader's role is to facilitate a three-way conversation. Importantly, this meeting should be supportive, not punitive. The goal is open, fair, fast conflict resolution. Make the conflict visible, deal with it directly and quickly. Don't let it fester underground.
That makes sense. And when you're in those conversations or just coaching someone through a tough spot, how you interact matters hugely. You want them to build their own problem-solving muscle, right?
Yeah.
Their own anti-fragility.
Definitely. This connects to the ideas in the coaching habit. The temptation for leaders, especially smart, experienced ones, is to jump in and give advice. Here's what you should do.
Which feels helpful, but maybe isn't.
It often disempowers the other person. Or the other trap is firing off a barrage of questions, which can feel like an interrogation.
Okay, so what's the alternative?
Focus on asking single, powerful, open-ended questions. And the book argues the most powerful coaching question is often simply, and what else?
What else? Why is that so effective?
Because it gently pushes the person to think deeper, to go beyond their first, maybe superficial answer. It encourages them to explore more options, consider different angles. Crucially, they are the ones generating the insights and solutions.
It supports their autonomy, their sense of capability.
Exactly. It builds their internal capacity to handle complexity themselves, rather than making them dependent on the leader for answers. That's building individual antifragility.
Another huge piece of the psychological puzzle is how we handle failure when it does happen.
Yeah.
Brené Brown's work on shame versus guilt, Or maybe here shame versus humiliation seems really relevant.
Hugely relevant. Shame is internally corrosive. It's the feeling, I am bad, I am a failure. When people feel shame, they tend to shut down, hide mistakes, avoid risks. It fosters fragility.
Okay, so shame is bad. How is humiliation different? Isn't that also terrible?
Humiliation is also terrible, yes. It's feeling degraded or unfairly treated. But Brown suggests it can be psychologically less destructive than shame in some ways.
Oh.
Because with humiliation, the person often feels, I don't deserve this treatment. This situation is wrong, or this person treating me this way is wrong. Their internal narrative might be, this isn't actually about me and my worth. It's about the unfairness of the situation.
Ah, so they don't internalize it as a fundamental flaw in themselves. They maintain their sense of values.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
They're less likely to completely shut down or internalize the failure as defining who they are. The big leadership takeaway is building a culture where failures are treated as learning opportunities, as data points, not as reasons for people to feel deep personal shame. That psychological safety is vital for anti-fragility.
And that ties into building trust, doesn't it? Like Stephen Covey's win-win or no-deal idea.
Absolutely. That whole paradigm is inherently anti-fragile because it starts from a place of seeking mutual benefit. It assumes abundance, there's enough for everyone, which naturally fosters collaboration and synergy rather than zero-sum competition.
And he emphasizes understanding first.
Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. When you genuinely try to grasp the other person's needs and perspective before pushing your own agenda, it changes the whole dynamic. It moves from potentially adversarial to cooperative. Problems get solved faster, relationships get stronger, the system becomes more resilient and adaptive to relational strains.
This idea of integrity, of operating from core values, seems to be a recurring theme, like the net positive concept or Pixar's focus on quality.
Yes, these are about having guiding principles that go beyond just short-term profit or efficiency. Quality is the best business plan. That's a long-term, value-driven goal. Net positive aims for transformative impact, not just minimizing harm.
And these act as anchors.
They act as anchors. When volatility hits, if your only goal is short-term financial metrics, you're tempted to make fragile, short-sighted decisions, cut corners, sacrifice quality, damage relationships. Having those deeper values-based goals helps the organization navigate shocks with its integrity intact, making it ultimately more robust, more anti-fragile. The goals themselves might even need to evolve and become more ambitious as understanding grows.
Which brings us perfectly to our final section, section 4, personal antifragility and ethical resilience. Because ultimately, these organizational structures and cultures depend on the people within them, especially the leaders.
Exactly. None of this works if the individuals themselves crumble under pressure or lose their ethical compass. This is about the personal disciplines needed to withstand and grow from both internal struggles and external chaos.
A really practical tool here comes back to Covey, the circle of influence versus the circle of concern.
Such a fundamental concept for managing ourselves in a complex world. A circle of concern is, well, everything we could possibly worry about.
The economy, politics, climate change, what other people think, they're mistakes.
All that stuff we fret about but have little or no direct control over. The circle of influence, on the other hand, is much smaller.
It's the things we can actually do something about.
Primarily, yes. Our own choices, our responses, our habits, our skills, our paradigms, how we see the world.
And Covey's point is about where we focus our energy.
Precisely. Proactive people, anti-fragile people, arguably focus their time and energy squarely on their circle of influence. They work on themselves, on what they can control.
And that has a positive effect.
It generates positive energy. It leads to actual results, which builds confidence and competence. And interestingly, it often expands their circle of influence over time. They become more capable, more trusted.
Whereas reactive people
fixate on the circle of concern. They blame external circumstances, complain about other people's weaknesses, feel like victims of forces beyond their control.
and that focus.
It generates negative energy. It leads to feelings of powerlessness, victimization, and ironically, it tends to shrink their circle of influence because they neglect the things they actually could control. So when facing complexity, the most powerful anti-fragile move is often internal. Focus on your own response, your own actions, not the uncontrollable storm outside.
That internal focus, that willingness to work on oneself, ties into how we view moral progress, too. Thomas Carlyle had a striking take on this.
Yeah, he described moral progress perhaps counterintuitively as a succession of falls.
Not a steady climb upwards.
No, he saw the path as inherently messy. The key wasn't avoiding falls, but the nature of the struggle between falls. It had to be, in his words, faithful and unconquerable, marked by genuine effort, maybe tears, repentance, but always renewing the purpose after each failure. Walking itself is a series of managed falls, right?
That's a powerful image. The antifragility is in the getting back up, the faithful renewal of effort, not in never stumbling.
Exactly. It acknowledges the imperfection inherent in the process.
Viktor Frankl takes this idea of finding strength amidst adversity even further, integrating suffering itself into his framework of meaning.
He does. Logotherapy deals directly with what he called the tragic triad of human existence: suffering, guilt, and death. These aren't things to be avoided or seen as signs of life's meaninglessness. Instead, Frankl argued that life's meaning, its ultimate psychological resilience or antifragility, can often be found precisely in our attitude towards these unavoidable aspects. Can we find meaning despite suffering? Can we take responsibility for guilt? Can we live authentically in the face of mortality?
So saying yes to life includes saying yes even to its tragic dimensions.
Yeah, it's the core of it. It's a profound psychological stance, refusing to let unavoidable hardship negate the possibility of meaning. Finding purpose not in the absence of difficulty, but sometimes through the response to difficulty.
Maintaining that kind of commitment, especially under extreme pressure, seems to require an almost non-negotiable level of integrity, an ethical bedrock.
Absolutely. And Cicero gives us some powerful examples from Roman history about the perceived value of principle over expediency.
Like the story of Regulus.
Yeah, Regulus, the Roman general captured by Carthage. He was sent back to Rome on oath to negotiate peace or prisoner exchange, but he actually argued against the deal in the Roman Senate, knowing it meant returning to Carthage to face torture and death. He kept his oath.
He valued his word, his integrity, above his life.
Exactly. And Cicero contrasts him with others, like soldiers who tried to weasel out of their oaths through clever tricks, like the guy who swore to return to Hannibal's camp, then immediately went back for something he'd forgotten, claiming he'd fulfilled the oath.
And the Romans didn't buy that.
The Senate punished that kind of deceit, arguing that foolish cunning trying to look like prudence actually aggravates perjury. They also made that incredibly tough decision after the disastrous Battle of Cannae.
Refusing to ransom thousands of their own captured soldiers, that seems harsh.
Incredibly harsh by our standards. But Cicero reports the reasoning. They did it that it might be engrafted in the minds of our soldiers that they must either conquer or die. The principle of unwavering commitment, the ethical foundation of the army, was deemed more crucial for long-term survival for antifragility, perhaps, than the immediate expediency of saving those men. What seems expedient can sink when compared with what is right.
Wow. That's a hardcore example of prioritizing principle. And the opposite, when that ethical foundation completely erodes, creates extreme fragility, doesn't it?
Utter fragility. Frederick Douglass observed this with devastating clarity when writing about religious slaveholders in the American South.
What did he notice?
He noted that, in his experience, the most outwardly religious slaveholders were often the worst, the meanest and basest, the most cruel and cowardly.
Using religion not as a guide, but as a cover?
Exactly. Using it as a dark shelter, in his words, to justify or conceal the most horrid crimes. When a stated value system, religion, corporate ethics, whatever is actively used to enable actions that contradict its core tenets, it creates a profound and destructive hypocrisy. It destroys trust, destroys social capital, and makes the person or institution incredibly fragile when exposed. Ethical antifragility requires that deep alignment between stated values and actual behavior. That integrity is the capital that truly endures volatility.
Okay, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground exploring this idea of the anti-fragile organization.
We have, and I think the core takeaway is clear. Anti-fragility isn't just resilience plus placil. It's a fundamentally different goal. It's the capacity to actually benefit from stress, disorder, volatility, to gain strength, knowledge, capability because of the shocks, not just in spite of them.
And those gains are often nonlinear, right?
Yeah.
Small stresses might build capacity. Big shocks might trigger transformations.
Exactly. And making this happen requires a huge shift for leaders, moving away from the impossible goal of preventing all risk.
Which often just leads to stagnation or brittleness.
And shifting focus to building the organization's ability to recover. How quickly can we learn? How effectively can we adapt? That Pixar mindset of seeing failure as data, not disaster.
Structurally, we saw it relies on pushing initiative down. Trusting those middle managers, those light infantry units, those project teams on the ground to make rapid, adaptive decisions based on local reality. Like Intel's turnaround or Clausewitz's small war tactics.
Yeah.
Power commensurate with the challenge.
Yeah, decentralization where appropriate. And culturally, it's built on a foundation of psychological safety, an environment where rigorous disagreement isn't just tolerated, it's required, as Drucker insisted, where conflict is handled directly and constructively, like in radical candor, and where failure doesn't lead to debilitating shame.
And underpinned by that non-negotiable ethical integrity we just discussed, the values that provide stability when everything else is shaking.
That's the bedrock.
So let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on. It comes inspired by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the philosopher and poet.
Oh, interesting. Where are we going with Emerson?
Emerson observed nature and saw it as this mutable cloud, which is always and never the same. Constant change, constant flux, yet an underlying spirit or pattern persists.
Okay.
But he warned against becoming hard pedants who focus too intensely on magnifying a few forms, the existing structures, the rigid plans, the way things have always been done. We cling to the form even when the underlying spirit or need has shifted.
Right. We get attached to the current shape, the status quo.
So if organizational anti-fragility means being always ready to change the form, the structure, the process, the plan, in service of the underlying purpose or spirit, here's the question for you, the listener. What deeply held assumption about your current organizational structure or your way of working is proving to be the most fragile thing you possess right now?
What form are you clinging to, perhaps out of comfort or habit, that no longer truly serves the purpose? Is it the hierarchy? Is it the planning process? Is it the definition of success?
What part of the current form is holding you back from adapting and gaining from the inevitable disorder?
That's a powerful question to reflect on. Are you serving the form, or is the form serving the spirit? That really gets to the heart of antifragility.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a great discussion.
Till next time, keep thinking.